My stepmom said I had wind in my head and demanded I give up my grandpa's land. I never thought I'd be returning to Grand Island, Nebraska, with nothing but $40,000 in student debt and a broken dream. Yet there I was, cruising down Interstate 80 in my 95 Ford F-150 that coughed like a lifetime smoker with emphysema. Garth Brooks was singing Friends in Low Places on the radio with a crackling static that my truck had perfected over the years. My name's Logan, 24 years old, college dropout, former engineering student who couldn't hack the math, current owner of absolutely nothing except this truck and a mountain of debt. The fields of Nebraska stretched out around me like an ocean of grain, the flat expanse only broken by the occasional farm or water tower, standing like lighthouses in the distance. My pickup and my dreams were equally on their last legs, but at least the truck was honest about its condition from the start. My grandfather's funeral was the day before, a small affair at the local Methodist church where the pastor talked about a man he barely knew. Grandpa Harold wasn't much for church, preferring instead to commune with nature on his 200-acre farm just outside of town. The farm that, according to the lawyer who cornered me after the service, now belonged to me. I pulled into Donnie's Diner, a roadside establishment that had been serving the same menu since Reagan was president. The neon sign flickered half-heartedly, much like my enthusiasm for being back in Grand Island. "What can I get you, sugar?" asked the waitress whose name tag read Doris. She had to be pushing 70, with hair dyed an unnatural shade of auburn and bright red lipstick that was slightly overdrawn around her lips. I ordered coffee and the breakfast special. The coffee arrived in a mug that had seen better days, poured from a pot that looked older than me. It tasted like liquid nostalgia, bitter yet comforting. As I waited for my food, I flipped through the papers the lawyer gave me. Grandpa Harold had left me everything. The farmhouse, the land, the old rusty tractor that hadn't run in a decade, and a hill, a stupid hill that he used to say breathes with the wind. I used to think it was just the rambling of an old man who spent too much time alone. The lawyer told me my stepmom Rita and her son Troy weren't too happy about the arrangement. Not that they wanted the farm. They'd been trying to get Grandpa to sell it for years to pump money into Troy's failing car dealership in Omaha. They just figured they'd get the cash from the sale after he was gone. I remembered sitting on the porch with Grandpa when I was 10, nursing a cold glass bottle of Coca-Cola. Those glass bottles made everything taste better, he'd say. We watched the sunset behind that hill, and he'd tell me stories. Not normal stories about baseball or fishing, but weird tales about how the hill sings if you listen with your heart. "That hill knows more than all of us combined, Logan," he'd say, his eyes fixed on the gentle slope in the distance. "It's been here long before us and will be here long after. It's got stories to tell, if you're patient enough to listen." I thought he was just being poetic or maybe a little senile. But he'd watched that hill like it was about to speak, like it held some secret he was desperate to understand. The bell above the diner door jingled, and in walked Troy, my stepbrother. He spotted me instantly, not hard in the nearly empty diner, and slid into booth across from me without invitation. "Heard you got the farm," he said, not bothered with condolences or small talk. He reeked of Axe body spray, the same scent he'd been dousing himself in since high school. His hair was gelled into spikes, a style at least a decade out of date. "Mom, and I figured you want to sell it. Place is nothing but weeds and that weird hill Grandpa was obsessed with." I just stared at him, taking a slow sip of my coffee. Troy never understood Grandpa Harold, never took the time to listen to his stories or help him around the farm. "Look, Logan," Troy continued, leaning forward, "that place is a money pit. The house is falling apart. The land is worthless for farming nowadays. And that hill is just a hill. Sell it all. Put some cash in your pocket. Maybe invest a little in our dealership in Omaha. Mom and I will give you a fair deal." A fair deal. That was rich coming from the guy who borrowed my Xbox in high school and sold it to buy a new leather jacket he never even wore. "I haven't decided what I'm doing yet," I told him, which wasn't entirely true. I had no intention of keeping the farm when I drove into town. The plan was to sell it, pay off some of my student loans, and try to restart my life somewhere else. But something about Troy's assumption that I'd just hand over irritated me. After breakfast, I drove out to the farm. The gravel driveway was overgrown with weeds, crunching under my tires as I approached the two-story farmhouse that had seen better days. The white paint was peeling, and the porch sagged slightly in the middle, but it was still standing, still solid in a way they don't build houses anymore. The key stuck in the lock, but eventually, the door swung open with a creak that echoed to the empty house. The air inside was stale but not unpleasant. It smelled like old books and the coffee Grandpa Harold always brewed too strong. I wandered through the rooms, memories flooding back with each step. This was my summer home throughout childhood, before Mom married Rita's brother, and our families got twisted together like a bad soap opera, before Mom died and left me with a stepmom who tolerated me at best. In the kitchen, I found a note on the fridge, held by a baseball-shaped magnet from a 1994 College World Series. It was in Grandpa's shaky handwriting. Check the barn. The barn was a massive structure that stood like a sentinel at the edge of the property. It was where Grandpa kept his tractor and tools, where he taught me to throw a baseball when I was 7. I remembered the summer afternoons, the smell of fresh-cut grass, and his patient instructions. "It's all in the wrist, Logan," he'd say, demonstrating the perfect spiral throw that had made him a local legend in his high school days. "You've got a natural arm. Could be pitching for the Huskers one day, if you keep at it." I never did keep at it. Baseball faded in importance as video games and girls took over my teenage world. The barn door groaned as I pulled it open, dust motes dancing the beams of sunlight that pierced through gaps in the wooden slats. The old tractor sat like a sleeping beast, covered in a layer of dust and cobwebs. Tools hung neatly on the wall, and in the corner, there was a metal filing cabinet that looked oddly out of place in the rustic setting. Inside the cabinet, I found dozens of notebooks, their yellow pages filled with Grandpa Harold's meticulous handwriting. They were weather records, daily wind speed measurements, barometric pressure readings, temperature fluctuations. Page after page, year after year, all focused on one specific location, the hill. Grandpa had been recording these measurements since the 1980s. As methodical as any scientist with a PhD, the entries were detailed, precise, with occasional notes that made no sense to me. Pattern holds consistent, unusually stable, unprecedented in the region. In the bottom drawer, I found a folder marked DOE correspondence. Inside were letters between Grandpa and someone at the Department of Energy, dating back to the late 1990s. The language was formal, bureaucratic, but I gathered that Grandpa had approached him about something to do with the hill, something about wind patterns and potential energy. The final letter, dated 1998, was brief. "After review of your proposal and data, we regret to inform you that the Department of Energy will not be pursuing further investigation into the site at this time." On the back of this letter, Grandpa had scrawled in angry, bold strokes, "Fools, the hill knows the truth." Next to the folder was a photograph in a simple frame. It showed Grandpa Harold standing on the hill with another man I didn't recognize. They were both smiling, squinting against the sun, the stranger in blue coveralls with a government logo I couldn't quite make out. When I turned the frame over, there was a note taped to the back in Grandpa's handwriting. "The wind waits, Jack." Jack. My grandfather's name was Harold. Who the heck was Jack? I set the photo down and picked up the most recent notebook. The last entry was dated just 2 weeks before Grandpa's heart attack. Wind speed consistent at 8 meters per second for 72 consecutive days. No natural formation should produce this pattern. They'll have to listen eventually. My phone buzzed with a text from Rita. "Dinner tonight, 6 p.m. We need to discuss the farm." I knew exactly what that discussion would entail. Rita in her Payless shoes trying to convince me that selling the farm was the only sensible option. Troy backing her up, talking about how the real estate developer from Lincoln had already expressed interest. Both of them pretending they were looking out for my best interests, while salivating over the potential commission for steering me toward their preferred buyer. I stopped at a gas station on the way back to town, grabbing a pack of Big Red gum, Grandpa Harold's favorite. The sweet cinnamon taste brought back summer memories of helping him fix fences and riding in his truck to the hardware store, where everyone knew his name. Back in the motel room I'd rented for the week, I laid out the notebooks on the bed, tried to make sense of my grandfather's obsession. The wind readings showed patterns that even I, with my limited engineering knowledge, could recognize as unusual. The hill consistently generated wind at speeds that should fluctuate but didn't. If Grandpa was right, if there was something special about that hill, why didn't the Department of Energy care? And why was he so persistent about it for decades after they shut him down? I pulled up Google Maps on my phone and looked at the satellite view of the farm. The hill didn't look like anything special from above, just a gentle rise in otherwise flat terrain. But Grandpa Harold wasn't crazy. Eccentric, sure, but not crazy. He was the most practical man I knew, teaching me how to change oil in the truck when I was 12 and explaining the commodities market when I was 15. If believing in a singing hill was insanity, then I'd already bought a ticket to this circus. I set the photograph of Grandpa and the mystery man on the nightstand and stared at it. The wind waits, Jack. What did that even mean? Was Jack a government scientist? Someone from the energy department? And what exactly were they waiting for? I thought about my options as I chewed on a stick of Big Red. I could sell the farm, pay off my student loans, and have enough left over for a decent used car. I could walk away from Grand Island and never look back, leave Grandpa Harold's obsession buried with him. Or I could stay, at least for a while, try to understand what he spent the last 30 years of his life studying. See if that hill really did sing. The photos stared back at me, Grandpa's eyes crinkling at the corners the way they did when he was truly happy. I picked it up again, studying the man beside him. There was something familiar about his stance, about the way he was pointing toward the horizon, like he was showing Grandpa something important. Who were you, Jack? I asked the empty room. And what did you know about my grandfather's hill? The only answer was a hum of the ancient air conditioner and the distant sound of trucks on the interstate, heading somewhere, anywhere but here. Yet somehow, for the first time since dropping out of college, I felt like I might be exactly where I needed to be. The dinner at Rita's house was exactly what I expected, a perfectly orchestrated ambush disguised as a family meal. The smell of green bean casserole with those crunchy onion things on top filled a modest 3-bedroom ranch-style home. Nebraska Cornhuskers were playing Oklahoma on the massive TV mounted above the electric fireplace, the volume cranked up just high enough to make conversation slightly uncomfortable. Rita had made an effort for the occasion. Her hair was freshly colored, that brassy blonde that women of a certain age in the Midwest seemed to gravitate toward. She wore her good jeans and a blouse from Kohl's that still had the creases from being folded in the package. Her Payless pumps clicked against the laminate flooring as she brought out dishes of food that had been warming in the oven. "Help yourself, Logan," she said, her voice sweet as artificial sweetener. "There's plenty." Troy sat across from me, still in his work clothes, khakis and a button-down with the car dealership logo embroidered on the chest. His desk job selling Nissans to people with terrible credit was clearly not going as well as he pretended. The dark circles under his eyes told a different story than his forced smile. As I scooped mashed potatoes onto my plate, I noticed a stack of papers sitting on the counter behind Rita. Real estate documents with yellow sign here, tabs sticking out at strategic intervals. Not exactly subtle. We made it through about 15 minutes of small talk about the weather and football before Rita reached for her glass of cheap Chardonnay and cleared her throat. "So, Logan, we got the paperwork all drawn up for the farm sale. The developer from Lincoln is offering a fair price considering the condition of the place. All we need is your signature, and we can get this wrapped up by the end of the week." I took a long drink of my Coors Light, buying time. I'm not selling. The clatter of Troy's fork against his plate sounded like a gunshot in the sudden silence. "What do you mean you're not selling?" Rita's smile remained fixed, but her knuckles whitened around her wine glass. "The place is falling apart. You can't possibly want to keep it. I want to look into something first. Something Grandpa Harold was working on." Troy snorted. "You mean his wind obsession? Come on, man. The old guy spent 30 years taking notes on a hill. He wasn't exactly working with a full deck." I felt my face flush with anger. He wasn't crazy. He was methodical. And I found something interesting in his records. Logan. Rita's voice took on that patronizing tone she perfected when I was a teenager. We paid for your college. For years of tuition that you wasted when you dropped out. You owe us, and this is your chance to make good. That was it. The nuclear option. The you owe us card that Rita played whenever she wanted something. As if my failure to graduate somehow entitled her to a return on investment. I don't owe you anything, I said quietly. Mom left the money for my education in a trust. You were just a trustee. Rita's face hardened. We took you in when your mother died. We could have shipped you off to foster care. Troy jumped in, his flannel shirt stretched tight across his shoulders as he leaned forward. Grandpa chased clouds, and now you're chasing his fairy tales. Good luck with that. I pushed back on the table, my appetite gone. Thanks for dinner. If you walk out that door without signing these papers, don't bother coming back. Rita called after me as I headed for the front door. I mean it, Logan. This is your one chance. The door slammed behind me with a satisfying thud. The cool evening air felt like freedom as I climbed into my truck and headed for the farm. That night, I slept in Grandpa Harold's old trailer that was parked behind the main farmhouse. It was a vintage Airstream from the 70s, its aluminum skin dented but still shining in the moonlight. Inside, it was basic but functional. A narrow bed, a small kitchenette, and a bathroom hardly bigger than an airplane lavatory. The space heater hummed loudly, fighting against the chill of the October night. I woke at dawn to the sound of wind whistling around the trailer's curved edges. Wrapped in an old Nebraska Cornhusker's blanket, I made instant coffee on the tiny stove and looked through more of Grandpa's notebooks. His observations were more detailed than I'd initially realized. Not just wind speeds, but pressure differentials, temperature gradients, and other measurements I didn't fully understand with my incomplete engineering education. But one thing was clear even to me. The data showed patterns that defied normal weather behavior. The hill generated consistent, reliable wind when surrounding areas showed typical fluctuations. After breakfast, I drove into town and used the free Wi-Fi at the local library to order an anemometer on eBay. It cost me $120 that I couldn't really afford, but I needed to verify Grandpa's readings myself. While I was there, I reached out to my old community college professor who taught meteorology. I sent him some of Grandpa's data and asked if he'd ever seen anything like it. 3 days later, the anemometer arrived. I mounted it exactly where Grandpa's old one had been, according to photographs I'd found in his files. Then I waited, checking the readings every few hours and comparing them to his historical data. The results were startling. Day after day, the wind blew at a steady 8 meters per second, varying by less than half a meter in either direction. It was like clockwork. Normal hills don't do that. Normal anything doesn't do that. I remember the day when I was maybe 12, sitting on that hill with Grandpa. He'd told me to close my eyes and just listen to the wind. Most people hear the wind but don't listen to it, he'd said, his own eyes closed, face tilted toward the sky. It's talking to us, Logan. Always has been. You just have to train your ears to understand its language. I closed my eyes like he asked, trying to hear whatever he was hearing. All I got was the rustle of the tall grass and the soft whoosh of air moving past my ears. Nothing special. I don't hear anything, Grandpa, I'd said after a minute. You will someday, he'd replied with absolute certainty. When you're ready to listen. A week after installing the anemometer, I was sitting in the trailer with a lukewarm Domino's pizza and a Bud Light that my nearest neighbor, an old farmer named Ed, had brought over when he stopped by to check on me. Ed wore the standard uniform of Nebraska farmers, Carhartt overalls over a flannel shirt, a seed company cap, and work boots caked with what I hoped was just mud. Your grandpa was a strange one, Ed had said, leaning against his ancient pickup, always up on that hill with his gadgets. But he was a good strange, you know? The kind that makes you wonder if maybe they're seeing something the rest of us are missing. I decided to post my findings on Reddit. I've been lurking on various subreddits for years, but rarely posted anything myself. That night, fueled by curiosity and cheap beer, I created a detailed post in our /renewable energy. My grandfather spent 30 years measuring wind patterns on his farm in Nebraska. He recorded consistent 8 meters per second winds on a hill that shouldn't behave that way. I verified his measurements. What could cause this? I included some of his data, photos of the hill, and my own recent readings. Then I set my cracked iPhone 6 aside and went to sleep, expecting maybe a few upvotes and some random theories. I woke to find my post had exploded. Over 15,000 upvotes overnight and hundreds of comments. People were fascinated by the mystery. Energy enthusiasts, meteorologists, geology nerds, conspiracy theorists, all weighing in with their take on phenomenon. Most of the comments were variations of, "You're sitting on a gold mine. Do you realize what consistent wind like that is worth to energy companies? This is statistically impossible. Something's wrong with your equipment. Check for underground caverns causing thermal effects." But one comment, buried about halfway down the thread, made my heart skip. I worked for the Department of Energy in the 90s. Your hill was on our list. The username was Windwatcher1965. Their profile showed they'd been on Reddit for years, but posted rarely, mostly in technical subreddits about renewable energy and government policy. I immediately sent them a private message. "What list? What did the DOE know about my grandfather's hill?" The reply came back an hour later. "Not here. Check your DMs tomorrow. Some things shouldn't be in public forums." I could barely focus the rest of the day. I kept checking my phone every 5 minutes, chugging Mountain Dew to stay alert. The sugar and caffeine had me wired, but Windwatcher1965 didn't send any more messages. To distract myself, I read through more comments on my post. One in particular, from a user claiming to be a wind energy consultant, caught my attention. "If your data is accurate, Big If, you're describing what we call a sweet spot, a location with class 4 or better wind resources that remain consistent. These are extraordinarily rare and extremely valuable for wind energy production. A single industrial turbine on that spot could generate enough electricity to power hundreds of homes. Multiple turbines could mean millions in revenue." My phone rang. It was Rita. The developer called. She said without preamble, "He's lowering his offer because you're dragging this out. Are you trying to ruin this for all of us?" "Rita, I think Grandpa was onto something with the hill. The wind patterns there aren't normal." Her laugh was brittle. "Oh, God, not you too. Your mother would be so disappointed to see you throwing away your future over some crazy old man's obsession." That was a low blow, even for Rita. My mother had been gone for over a decade, but Rita still wielded her memory like a weapon when it suited her. "Don't call me again unless you're ready to apologize," I said and hung up. My phone immediately buzzed with a text from Troy. "Way to make Mom cry, jerk. Hope your magic hill keeps you warm at night." I tossed the phone onto the trailer's small dining table and went outside to check the anemometer readings again. Still steady at 8 meters per second, despite the fact that it was a perfectly still evening everywhere else on the property. Standing on that hill, I tried again to hear what Grandpa Harold had heard. I closed my eyes and focused on the constant, gentle push of air against my skin. It didn't feel like normal wind, which comes in gusts and lulls. This was steady, almost like being in a wind tunnel. "If wind is madness," I said to the empty hilltop, "then I'm already building a windmill asylum." That night, I slept better than I had in months. Something about committing to this path, whatever it led to, felt right. For the first time since dropping out of engineering school, I felt like I had a purpose, a direction. The next day, I got lucky at the local thrift store and found an old laptop for $50. It was ancient by modern standards, a Dell from about 2010, but it worked well enough to let me check Reddit without having to squint at my phone screen. The comment section on my post had grown to over 1,000 replies. People were debating theories ranging from the scientific, underground thermal vents, to the absurd alien technology. But still no DM from Windwatcher1965. I decided to edit my original post with an update. "Thanks for all the comments and theories. I've been taking more measurements, and the wind speed remains consistent at 8 meters per second. To those asking if I'm going to contact wind energy companies, not yet. I want to understand what's happening here first. My grandfather tried to get the Department of Energy interested in the 1990s, but they turned him down for some reason. Within minutes of posting this update, my inbox pinged with a new direct message. It was from Windwatcher 1965. Your grandfather's site was classified as an anomaly in 1998. It was one of 7 locations across the country that showed unexplainable wind patterns. 6 were on federal land and were subjected to extensive study. Yours was the only one on private property, and your grandfather refused access without certain guarantees the department wasn't willing to make. I stare at the message, my hand shaking slightly as I type my reply. What kind of guarantees? And what did they find at the other sites? The response came back quickly. He wanted assurances that any energy technology developed would benefit the local community first, not just disappear into federal projects. As for the other sites, that's complicated. I can't say much here. But I was on the assessment team for your grandfather's hill. There's more going on there than just unusual wind patterns. Check your DMs tomorrow for a secure contact method. I retired from the DOE 10 years ago, but I still have colleagues who will be very interested to know you're continuing your grandfather's work. My heart pounded in my chest as I read and reread the message. This wasn't just some random internet person making things up. They knew specific details that matched what I found in Grandpa's notebooks. And they were hinting at something bigger, something the government had been interested enough to classify as an anomaly. I took a screenshot of the message just in case it disappeared, then went back to reading the other comments. Most were variations on themes I'd already seen, but one new comment near the top caught my eye. If this is legit, you need to be careful who you talk to about it. Energy companies will try to buy you out for pennies on the dollar if they realize what you've got. Get a lawyer ASAP. It was good advice. If there really was something valuable about this hill, I needed to protect myself and Grandpa Harold's legacy. But lawyers cost money, and I had approximately none of that. As I sat there pondering my next move, a notification popped up on my screen. Someone had awarded my post a platinum award, Reddit's equivalent of a gold star on steroids. The accompanying message read, "Check your email. We should talk." I hadn't included my email in the post, but it was in my Reddit profile. Curious and slightly wary, I opened my Gmail account. There was an email from an address I didn't recognize with the subject line, "Your grandfather's wind anomaly. Skyvolt Energy is interested." The body of the email was brief and professional. My name is Julian Matthews, head of research for Skyvolt Energy. Your Reddit post about the consistent wind patterns on your property has come to our attention. If your data is accurate, this could be an extremely valuable site for wind energy development. We would like to discuss potential collaboration. Please call me at the number below at your earliest convenience. There was a phone number with a Denver area code and a link to the Skyvolt Energy website, which looked legitimate at first glance. I closed the laptop and went outside to stare at the hill in the fading evening light. My post had got more likes than all my Tinder photos combined over the years, and now it was drawing attention from energy companies and mysterious government contractors. What had Grandpa Harold stumbled onto all those years ago? And why had the Department of Energy ultimately turned their backs on his discovery? The hill didn't look like anything special, just a gentle rise in the landscape, covered in prairie grass that rippled in the steady, inexplicable wind. But somewhere in those 200 acres, there was a secret that had consumed the last 30 years of my grandfather's life. And now it was consuming mine. The laptop chimed from inside the trailer. Another notification. I went back inside and opened it to find a new DM from Windwatcher 1965. Be careful who you talk to about this. Not everyone has your best interests at heart. There's a reason the DOE walked away from your grandfather's site, and it wasn't because they didn't believe his data. Check your DMs tomorrow. Some things are better discussed through more secure channels. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the autumn air seeping through the trailer's thin walls. After a sleepless night spent reading and rereading the message from Windwatcher 1965, I decided to take a gamble and call the number from the Skyvolt email. Whatever government secrets might be lurking in the background, I needed to understand the practical value of what Grandpa Harold had discovered. Plus, My bank account was hovering dangerously close to empty. The call was brief and professional. Julian Matthews, head of research at Skyvolt Energy, suggested we meet in person to discuss the potential of my property. We agreed on a Starbucks in Lincoln, about an hour's drive from Grand Island. 2 days later, I pulled my beat-up Ford F-150 into the parking lot of a suburban shopping center anchored by a Starbucks. My truck looked comically out of place next to the Audis and BMWs that populated the lot. I tried to clean up for the meeting, wearing my only button-down shirt that wasn't wrinkled beyond recognition, and a pair of jeans without any obvious stains. Julian was easy to spot. Tall, mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair cropped short on the sides in that tech executive style that costs more than a regular haircut has any right to. He wore a Patagonia jacket over a crisp blue button-down and khakis. Everything about him screamed, I make serious money, but pretend to be casual about it. He spotted me as soon as I walked in, rising from his table with a genuine smile. The smell of his artisanal cold brew coffee mixed with subtle cologne as he extended his hand. Logan, right? I'm Julian Matthews. Thanks for making the drive. We sat across from each other, my plain black coffee looking sad next to his complicated drink. Julian opened his MacBook Pro and turned it toward me, revealing a series of graphs and wind pattern analyses. Let me get right to it, he said, his voice dropping slightly. Your grandfather discovered something extraordinary. These wind readings you posted, they're not just unusual, they're nearly impossible in nature. For the next 20 minutes, Julian explained the science of wind energy to me in terms simple enough that even a college dropout could understand. He showed me maps of the best wind energy collection sites in the country, highlighting areas in the Dakotas and Wyoming where companies like his had built massive wind farms. Those sites get great wind, but it's intermittent, gusting strong one day, barely moving the next. That's why we need battery storage, backup generators, all that expensive infrastructure. He tapped on my grandfather's data. But your hill, it's giving consistent 8 meters per second wind speeds practically 24/7. That's the holy grail of wind energy. My heart was pounding. So it's valuable? Julian chuckled. Logan, you're sitting on a gold mine. It's the wind energy boom, and you just hit the jackpot. I took a sip of my coffee to hide my excitement. What exactly are we talking about here? In terms of value? Skyvolt would like to lease your land for wind turbine placement. Given the unique nature of your site, we're prepared to offer a substantial upfront payment plus ongoing royalties from the energy production. How substantial? I asked, trying to sound like a person who discussed business deals every day. Julian wrote a number on a napkin and slid it across the table. $5 million. Plus annual royalties estimated at $200,000 to $300,000. I nearly choked on my coffee. There's just one thing, I said, once I could breathe again. I need to understand why the Department of Energy walked away from this 30 years ago. My grandfather approached them with the same data, and they weren't interested. Julian's eyebrows raised slightly. That was a different era. Wind energy wasn't commercially viable then. The technology wasn't there yet. He paused. There's no mystery here, Logan. Just bad timing on your grandfather's part and good timing on yours. His explanation made perfect sense, but something about it didn't sit right with me. Maybe it was Windwatcher 1965's cryptic messages, or maybe it was just loyalty to Grandpa Harold's memory. Either way, I knew I needed legal help before signing anything. I need to think about it, I told Julian, and talk to a lawyer. He nodded approvingly. Smart move. We'll draw up the paperwork and send it over. Take your time, get proper representation. He handed me his business card. But don't take too long. This kind of opportunity attracts attention. I spent the drive back to Grand Island in a daze, calculating what $5 million would mean for my life. My student loans would be gone in an instant. I could buy a new truck, maybe even a modest house somewhere. Security. Freedom. But something kept nagging at me. If this deal was so straightforward, why had Windwatch in 1965 been so cryptic? And why had Grandpa been so obsessed with the hill right up until his death, decades after the DOE rejected his findings? Back at the farm, I remembered that Grandpa Harold used to mention a lawyer friend named Clark who had helped him with various legal matters over the years. After some digging through his address book, I found a listing. Walter Clark, attorney at law, with address in downtown Grand Island. The next morning, I drove to a small brick building sandwiched between a barber shop and a tax preparation office. The sign on the door simply read Clark Legal Services in faded gold lettering. I half expected the place to be closed permanently, but the door opened to a small waiting room that smelled of old books and coffee. The receptionist, a woman who looked old enough to have typed documents for Abraham Lincoln, glanced up from behind cat-eye glasses. "May I help you?" "I'm looking for Walter Clark. My grandfather was Harold Jenkins. I believe they were friends." Her face softened immediately. "Oh, Harold's grandson. Yes, Mr. Clark mentioned you inherited the farm. He's with a client right now, but he should be free shortly. Have a seat." The waiting room had the comforting feel of a place untouched by time. No digital displays, no modern furniture, just well-worn leather chairs and magazines from at least 6 months ago. A Keurig coffee maker sat on a small table, the one concession to the 21st century. 20 minutes later, I was ushered into Walter Clark's office. He was a small man with thinning white hair and glasses that magnified his eyes to owl-like proportions. His handshake was surprisingly firm. "Logan Jenkins," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his cluttered desk. "You look just like your grandfather did at your age, except he had more hair." He chuckled at his own joke. "Now, what can I do for you?" I explained the situation, the hill, the wind patterns, Skyvolt's offer, and my concerns about moving forward without understanding what the Department of Energy had found all those years ago. Walter listened quietly, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and removed his glasses. "Your grandfather was a brilliant man, Logan. Eccentric, yes, but brilliant. He knew that hill was special long before anyone else caught on. He polished his glasses with a handkerchief. He came to me in the late 90s, after the DOE rejection, asked me to help him protect his discovery. Protect it how? We set up a series of legal entities to control different aspects of the property. Limited liability companies, or LLCs. 4 of them, to be precise. One owns the land itself. Another owns the research data. A third holds the mineral and air rights. The 4th is a holding company that ties it all together. My confusion must have shown on my face, because he continued, without prompting. "Your grandfather was playing the long game. Logan, he knew the value of what he'd found, even if others didn't recognize it yet. He structured everything so that when the time came, which apparently is now, his discovery couldn't just be taken or bought for pennies on the dollar. So what should I do about Skyvolt's offer?" Walter replaced his glasses and sat forward. "Let me review their contract. But more importantly, let me update your grandfather's legal structure to put you in control of all 4 LLCs. That will give you the strongest negotiating position." Over the next 2 weeks, Walter worked his legal magic, while I continued to correspond with Julian from Skyvolt. The company sent technicians with drones to conduct their own analysis of the hill, confirming what Grandpa and I had already discovered. The site was a wind energy miracle. I watched from the porch of the farmhouse as the drones buzzed over the property, their operators huddled around monitors set up in the back of a company SUV. One of the technicians, a woman not much older than me, approached as I sipped my morning coffee. "I've been in wind assessment for 5 years, she said, shaking her head in amazement. "I've never seen anything like this. It's like the hill is generating its own microclimate." With Walter's guidance, I negotiated terms that would have made any venture capitalist proud. $5 million up front for a 25-year lease, plus royalties on all energy produced. Skyvolt would build and maintain the turbines, but I retained ownership of the land and all rights. Most importantly, I insisted on an environmental impact study and community benefit provisions that ensured the surrounding area would see advantages beyond just my windfall. The day I signed the contract, Walter handed me a glass of bourbon that probably cost more than any alcohol I'd ever consumed. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said as we clinked glasses. He knew what he was doing. The rest of us just thought he was chasing windmills. The first $1 million hit my bank account 3 days later. I paid off my student loans with a single mouse click. $40,000 gone in an instant. The relief was indescribable, like setting down a backpack full of rocks I'd been carrying for years. I bought the farm back from the bank that held Grandpa's mortgage, securing the full 200 acres outright. The repair crew I hired to fix the water tower and patch the farmhouse roof looked at me like I was crazy when I told them I intended to keep living in the trailer. "You could build a mansion now," the foreman said, eyeing the Airstream dubiously. I just shrugged. The trailer suits me fine. The truth was, I'd grown attached to the small aluminum space. It was where Grandpa Harold had done much of his thinking and writing about the hill. It felt right to continue to work from there. I did splurge on a few things: a new laptop, better internet service for the property, and a shiny Chevy Silverado to replace my dying Ford. But whenever I went into town, I still wore the same clothes, ate at the same diners, and generally tried to avoid becoming that rich jerk who lucked into money. One evening, I drove into Grand Island to celebrate at the local bar where I'd occasionally hung out during high school and college breaks. The place was having a karaoke night, the speakers blaring Sweet Home Alabama as a group of somewhat intoxicated nurses belted out the chorus. I nursed a beer at the bar, enjoying the normality of it all. "Logan Jenkins? Is that you?" I turned to see a woman with curly brown hair and a friendly smile. It took me a moment to place her, Lily Chun, from my high school graduating class. We'd had AP Physics together senior year. "Lily, hey, how are you?" "I'm good. Teaching agricultural science at the community college now. What about you?" "Last I heard you were at Nebraska studying engineering." I gave her the condensed version. Dropping out, coming back for Grandpa's funeral, discovering the wind anomaly and the skyvolt deal. Her eyes widened with each development in the story. "That's incredible, Logan. Your grandfather was always so passionate about that hill. I remember him coming to give a guest lecture in my undergrad meteorology class." This was news to me. "Grandpa gave lectures?" Lily nodded. "A few times. Most of the faculty thought he was a bit eccentric, but Professor Larson always took him seriously." She pulled out her phone. "Actually, I digitized a bunch of department archives for a project last year. I think I might have something from your grandfather." She scrolled through her files and then turned the screen toward me. It was a scanned letter from Grandpa Harold to the Agricultural Sciences Department, dated about 6 months before his death. "If I don't live to complete this work," the letter read, "someone must finish what I've started. The hill's secret isn't just about energy production. It's about understanding patterns that could revolutionize how we think about sustainable resources. The wind is just the beginning." Attached to the letter was a series of equations and graphs that meant nothing to me with my incomplete engineering education. But Grandpa's handwriting at the bottom of the page caught my attention. "The pattern holds across scales. Look beyond the hill." Lily watched my face as I read. "Does that mean something to you?" I wasn't sure, but it felt important. "Can you send me this? And anything else you might have from him?" Later that night, back in the trailer, I stared at the scanned letter on my new laptop. The wind is just the beginning. What had Grandpa meant by that? And what pattern was he seeing that holds across scales? I stepped outside and walked up the hill in the moonlight. The wind was there, steady as always, pushing against my skin with its mysterious consistency. Standing at the top, I closed my eyes and tried again to hear what Grandpa Harold had heard, to feel what he had felt. For a moment, I could almost sense him standing beside me, smiling at the turbines that would soon harness the phenomenon he discovered decades before anyone believed him. "Money can buy pickup trucks," I said to the night air, "but only the wind can buy a soul." It sounded like something Grandpa might have said, poetic and a little cryptic. I found myself checking online pizza coupons that same night, despite having millions in the bank. Old habits die hard, and part of me still couldn't believe the turn my life had taken. Back in the trailer, I spread out all of Grandpa's notebooks alongside Lily's scanned documents. There was something here I was missing, some connection, or insight that had driven his decades-long obsession. The hill wasn't just a cash cow. It was a puzzle he'd been trying to solve. The hill's secret isn't just about energy production. I read again from his letter. What else could it be about? I opened his final notebook, studying the neat columns of data and occasional margin notes. About a week before his heart attack, he'd written, "Third confirmation. The pattern is fractal. Fractal, a mathematical pattern that repeats at different scales." I'd learned about them in calculus before dropping out. What pattern had Grandpa seen that repeated across scales? And how did it connect to the hill's consistent wind? As I flipped through the pages, a loose paper slipped out, a printout of an email thread between Grandpa and someone at MIT's Earth Sciences department. Most of it was technical jargon about atmospheric boundary layers and thermodynamic systems, but one line jumped out. If your measurements are accurate, you may have discovered a natural resonance phenomenon that can inform energy collection well beyond wind power. Natural resonance. The hill somehow vibrating at exactly the right frequency to generate consistent wind patterns. But resonating with what? And what did Grandpa mean about the pattern holding across scales? I stayed up until dawn, reading through his notes and the materials Lily had sent. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that Grandpa Harold hadn't just stumbled onto a lucrative wind energy site. He discovered something fundamental about how energy moves through natural systems, something that, in his own words, could revolutionize how we think about sustainable resources. I fell asleep at the small table in the trailer, my head resting on decades of one man's research and vision. The letter from Lily lay open beside me, Grandpa's final scientific testament. If I don't live to complete this work, someone must finish what I've started. That someone, it seemed, was me. 6 months after signing the contract with Skyvolt, the first wind turbines were installed on the hill. 3 massive white giants with blades that stretched nearly 200 feet from tip to tip. They looked like something from a sci-fi movie against the flat Nebraska landscape. The engineers were amazed at how consistently they spun, generating power at near maximum capacity day and night. I watched the installation from the porch of the farmhouse, which I'd finally renovated. The outside maintained its classic white farmhouse look, but the inside now had modern appliances and decent furniture. Still, most nights I found myself sleeping in Grandpa Harold's trailer, surrounded by his notebooks and research. My newfound wealth felt surreal. The account balance on my banking app looked like someone else's life, not mine. After paying off my student loans, fixing up the farm, and buying a new truck, I struggled with what to do with the rest. It just sat there, accumulating interest, while I tried to figure out what Grandpa's legacy should really be. Lily became a regular visitor to the farm, helping me sort through Grandpa's research and put together the pieces of what he'd been working on. Her background in agricultural science and my partial engineering education made us a decent team for amateur scientific investigation. "Your grandfather wasn't just measuring wind," she said one evening as we sat at the kitchen table surrounded by papers. "He was measuring something fundamental about energy transfer in natural systems." That conversation led to the creation of the Wind Legacy Foundation. With Lily's help and Walter Clark's legal expertise, I established a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting sustainable energy research and implementation in rural communities. We started by offering grants to local farmers wanting to install small-scale wind or solar systems on their properties. The foundation quickly became my purpose. Instead of just sitting on my millions, I was using them to continue what Grandpa Harold had started, finding ways to harness natural energy patterns to benefit regular people, not just corporations. Lily suggested we create an educational program for local schools. We called it Your Town's Wind, a series of field trips and hands-on activities that taught kids about renewable energy. The farm became our classroom, with the hill and its 3 massive turbines as a star attraction. We converted one of the old barns into a small museum highlighting Grandpa Harold's research in the science of wind energy. On the main wall, I had his favorite quote painted in bold letters: "The wind doesn't ask permission, it just blows." During our first school tour, I watched a group of 4th graders race up the hill, their excitement palpable as they stood beneath the giant turbines and felt the steady wind that had made all this possible. They munched on hot dogs and Lay's potato chips from the lunch we provided, asking surprisingly insightful questions about renewable energy. One little girl with glasses and braided hair asked, "If the wind here is special, are there other places with special wind too?" Her question hit me like a ton of bricks. Grandpas know about patterns that hold across scales suddenly took on new meaning. What if the hill wasn't unique? What if it was just one example of a phenomenon that could be found elsewhere? I added this to my growing list of research questions. The educational program took off faster than we expected. Local schools loved it because it was free and aligned perfectly with their science curriculum. Soon we were hosting field trips several times a week, with Lily leading most of the educational sessions while I managed the foundation and continued digging through Grandpa's research. We made a good team, Lily and I. Our friendship gradually evolved into something more, though neither of us was in a rush to define it. We grabbed Dunkin' Donuts coffee in the mornings and planned the day's activities, our conversations flowing easily between foundation business and personal topics. One unseasonably warm spring day, as we watched another school group explore the property, Lily nudged my arm and pointed toward the driveway. A Honda Odyssey minivan was making its way up the gravel drive, kicking up dust in its wake. "Isn't it your stepmom's car?" she asked. My stomach tightened. I hadn't spoken to Rita or Troy since our blowout over selling the farm. With everything that had happened, I'd almost forgotten about them. Almost. The minivan parked next to the barn, and Rita stepped out. She looked smaller somehow, her typically perfect hair slightly disheveled. Her eyes were red-rimmed behind her sunglasses, which she removed as she approached us. "This is quite something you've done here, Logan," she said, gesturing toward the museum and the school bus parked nearby. "Your grandfather will be proud." The compliment caught me off guard. "Thanks. What brings you by?" "Troy's dealership went under," she said simply. "We're moving to Lincoln. I guess I wanted to apologize before we left town, and to see what you've done with Harold's crazy hill." I introduced her to Lily, who politely excused herself to check on the students, giving us privacy. "We were wrong about your grandfather," Rita continued, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Troy and I were too afraid to dream big like Harold did. We played it safe, and look where that got us." She attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Nowhere. The anger I'd held on to began to dissolve. Rita wasn't a villain in my story, just a woman who'd made choices based on what she thought was practical, just like I'd almost done by selling the farm. "Would you like a tour?" I offered. She nodded, and I showed her the museum, the educational displays, and finally, the hill with its 3 massive turbines. Rita listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about the foundation and the science behind the wind phenomenon. "Harold always said this hill was special," she mused as we stood watching the turbine spin. "I thought he was just being stubborn, refusing to sell because of some sentimental attachment. I never imagined." She gestured toward the installation. "All this, I didn't either," I admitted. But he knew. Somehow he knew. We didn't become best friends that day, but we made peace. As Rita left, she promised to stay in touch and asked if there might be a job for Troy at the foundation once they were settled in Lincoln. I told her I'd consider it, and I meant it. Family is complicated, but sometimes second chances are worth giving. A month later, I received an unexpected email from the State Energy Commission, inviting me to join a newly formed coalition of wind energy stakeholders. The group would be advising on policy for renewable energy development across Nebraska. I forwarded it to Lily. "Are you going to do it?" she asked over lunch at the diner in town. "I don't know. I'm not exactly a suit and tie policy guy." "Exactly why you should go," she countered. "They need people who understand this stuff on the ground level, not just executives and bureaucrats." The first coalition meeting was held in a sleek conference room in Omaha. I felt wildly out of place in my button-down shirt and jeans, surrounded by people in business suits and government officials with polished manners. At 25, I was easily the youngest person there by at least 2 decades. I took my seat at the large oval table, trying not to fidget as introductions went around the room. Energy company CEOs, state officials, environmental advocates, And then me, the college dropout who got lucky with a hill. When my turn came, I kept it simple. Logan Jenkins, Wind Legacy Foundation, and owner of the Grand Island Wind Anomaly Site. The meeting proceeded with discussions about grid integration, tax incentives, and rural development opportunities from wind energy. I mostly listened, jumping in occasionally when the conversation touched on community impacts or small-scale applications, areas where our foundation had gained some expertise. During a coffee break, I found myself standing near a group of energy company executives who hadn't noticed me approaching. Their conversation froze me in place. "Jenkins doesn't know what he's sitting on," one of them said in a low voice. "Northstar would pay triple what Skyvolt offered for that land." Another voice chimed in. "The anomaly isn't just about wind. Our research suggests it's connected to." They noticed me then, abruptly changing the subject to the weather forecast. I pretended I hadn't heard anything and moved to the refreshment table, my mind racing. What did they mean the anomaly wasn't just about wind? And who or what was Northstar? Another energy company willing to pay $15 million for my land? Back at the farm that evening, I fire up my laptop and search for Northstar Energy. The results were sparse, a relatively new company specializing in next-generation renewable technologies. Their website was slick but vague, full of stock photos of wind turbines and solar panels, but light on specific projects or technologies. The executive's hushed conversation bothered me all week. I decided to reach out to Julian at Skyvolt to see if he knew anything about this competing company. "Northstar? Yeah, they're new players," Julian said when I called. "Backed by some serious venture capital and a few government contracts. Rumor has it they're working on something revolutionary, but nobody knows exactly what. And they're interested in my property? I wouldn't be surprised. Your site is unique, Logan. That's why we locked in our agreement when we did." That evening, as Lily and I went through more of Grandpa's papers, I told her about the overheard conversation. "I've got a bad feeling about this," she said, setting down the notebook she'd been examining. "If Northstar is willing to pay that much, they must know something we don't, something your grandfather might have known too." We spread out his later notebooks, looking for any mention of phenomena beyond wind energy. One passage caught my eye. The resonance affects more than air movement. Preliminary tests show similar patterns in ground electromagnetic readings. Lily looked up from her stack of papers. "Logan, look at this." She handed me a faded photograph I hadn't seen before. It showed Grandpa Harold standing on the hill with another man, the same mystery man from the photo I found months ago. Jack. But this image showed something in the background. A device that looked like a cross between a satellite dish and a Tesla coil. On the back, Grandpa had written, "Test successful. Pattern amplification achieved at 50% efficiency. Jack says DOE will be interested now." Who the hell is Jack? I wondered aloud. A quick internet search provided no answers. But in Grandpa's final notebook, we found a series of coordinates marked simply Test Sites 1 to 7. One set matched our hill perfectly. The others were scattered across different states. The next day, another school group arrived for their tour. As Lily led them to the museum, I noticed a little boy staring up at Grandpa's quote on the wall, mouthing the words silently to himself. "The wind doesn't ask permission. It just blows." Something about his wonder-filled expression reminded me of how Grandpa used to look when he talked about the hill. Pure belief, untainted by doubt or cynicism. I felt a lump form in my throat, wishing Grandpa could see all this. Children learning from his lifelong passion, the turbines harvesting the wind he'd studied for decades. One of the teachers approached me as the kids explored the interactive displays. "This is amazing," she said. "Most of these children have never seen renewable energy up close. You're changing how they think about the future." I thanked her, watching as a group of students gathered around Lily, who was demonstrating a small wind turbine model. She caught my eye across the room and smiled, and I felt that same steady certainty that had guided Grandpa Harold all those years. Whatever this hill's secret was, it was worth protecting. Later that night, Lily and I sat on the porch, watching the turbine spin against the sunset. Tesla solar panels we'd installed on the farm buildings gleamed in the fading light, another step toward making the property completely self-sufficient. Your grandfather used to say that wind is freedom, I told Lily, remembering one of his favorite sayings. But freedom, damn it, is like an expensive Netflix subscription. She laughed. What does that even mean? I think he meant that true freedom, energy independence, financial security, the ability to follow your convictions, comes at a price, but it's worth every penny. Our conversation was interrupted by an email notification on my phone. It was from Walter Clark, with a subject line that sent a chill down my spine. DOE Archives, Project Windspeak. The email contained scanned documents Walter had obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request he'd filed on my behalf months ago. The heavily redacted pages appear to be from a government research initiative in the mid-1990s, studying natural energy amplification sites across the country. One paragraph caught my attention immediately. Site number 3, Nebraska, displays the most stable pattern and highest efficiency potential. The property owner has been monitoring the phenomenon independently for nearly a decade. Recommend full acquisition of site for continued testing. Another page mentioned a Dr. J. Whitman as the lead researcher. Jack Whitman? Could this be the mysterious Jack from Grandpa's photos? The final page was a memo dated 1998 with the subject Project Termination and Classification. Due to unexpected complications at sites number 1 and number 5, and the Nebraska property owner's refusal to sell, Project Windspeak is hereby suspended. All findings are classified level 3. No further contact with civilian observers or property owners authorized. I forwarded the email to Lily with a simple message. We need to talk. At the next coalition meeting, I paid closer attention to who was there, searching for connections to this mysterious Northstar or any mention of Jack Whitman. I felt like a cowboy on Wall Street in my jeans among all the suits, but I was beginning to realize there was a bigger game being played than I'd understood. During lunch, I overheard another fragment of conversation from a corner table of executives I didn't recognize. Jenkins is digging too deep. The question is whether buy him out or bring him in. Northstar prepared to offer whatever it takes. That property is the key to everything. I slipped away before they noticed me, my appetite gone. Whatever Grandpa Harold had discovered, whatever made our hill special beyond just consistent wind, others were now determined to possess it at any cost. Driving home, I wonder if these competitors were somehow connected to Jack or the Department of Energy's abandoned project. What had happened at sites number 1 and number 5 that had shut everything down in 1998? And what made our hill so valuable that a company would offer triple Skyvolt's already generous payment? The security of having $5 million suddenly felt very temporary. I wasn't just protecting a hill anymore. I was guarding a secret I didn't fully understand. The mystery of Northstar Energy and their interest in my property took a back seat when a familiar truck pulled into my driveway one rainy Tuesday morning. It was Troy's old Dodge Ram. The paint faded and a dent in the passenger door that hadn't been there the last time I'd seen it. Troy himself looked just as worn down as his vehicle when he stepped out, wearing a rumpled suit that hung loosely on his frame. He'd lost weight, and the cockiness that had always defined him seemed to have evaporated. I watched from the porch as he hesitated by his truck, clearly unsure of his welcome. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead as he finally squared his shoulders and approached. "Hey, Logan," he said, his voice lacking its usual brashness. "Place looks good." I nodded, not making it easy for him. Rita had mentioned his dealership failing, but seeing the evidence of his downfall in person was different. Part of me felt satisfaction. Karma finally catching up to my stepbrother after years of his smugness and shortcuts. But another part remembered what it felt like to have your plans collapse around you. "Rita said you might need help around here," Troy continued, rainwater dripping from his chin. "I know I've been a jerk, but I'm asking for a chance, Logan. Just one chance." I considered him for a long moment, then gestured toward the door. "Come in and dry off. We'll talk." Over coffee in the kitchen, Troy explained how the dealership had gone under. A combination of bad loans, dwindling sales, and his own poor decisions. He'd lost almost everything, including his house. He and Rita were living in a small apartment in Lincoln now, and he was having trouble finding work with a failed business on his resume. "I'm not looking for a handout," he insisted, though his eyes kept darting around the renovated farmhouse, taking in the evidence of my newfound prosperity. "Just a job, anything. I can do maintenance, security, whatever you need." It would have been easy to turn him away. After all, he and Rita had mocked Grandpa Harold and pressured me to sell this place for a fraction of its worth. But I remember how Grandpa had always emphasized forgiveness, how he'd welcome back neighbors who'd laugh at his wind obsession whenever they needed help with mechanical problems or farm equipment. "We need a maintenance tech for the education center," I told Troy. "The pay is decent, and there's an old foreman's cottage on the property you could fix up and live in. It needs work, but it's got good bones." The relief on Troy's face was almost painful to see. He accepted immediately, the desperation in his voice making me uncomfortable. This new, humbled version of my stepbrother would take some getting used to. Over the next few months, Troy surprised me by becoming one of the hardest workers at the foundation. He showed up early, stayed late, and never complained about any task assigned to him. The cottage gradually transformed under his care, and he started taking genuine interest in the educational programs. One afternoon, I found him explaining to a group of middle schoolers how the small wind turbine models worked, using analogies to car engines to make the science accessible. "You're good with the kids," I told him afterward. He shrugged. "Never thought I would be, but it feels good, teaching them something useful, instead of just trying to sell people stuff they can't afford." With Troy handling the day-to-day maintenance and Lily overseeing the educational programs, I focused on expanding the Wind Legacy Center. Walter helped me navigate the permits and regulations to build a proper facility that could accommodate larger groups and more advanced research. The grand opening was scheduled for exactly 1 year after I'd signed a contract with Skyvolt. Invitations went out to local schools, farmers, government officials, and even the Energy Coalition members. PBS sent a film crew to document the event for a special on rural renewable energy initiatives. The week before the opening, I received another cryptic email from Windwatcher 1965. "Northstar is making moves. Watch your back at the ceremony." I'd almost forgotten about the mysterious Reddit user who'd first tipped me off about the DOE's interest in Grandpa's Hill. Their warning put me on edge, but I wasn't about to cancel an event we'd spent months planning. The day of the grand opening dawned clear and perfect, with Grandpa's steady wind blowing across the hill at its reliable 8 meters per second. A large white tent had been set up for the ceremony, with rows of folding chairs facing a small stage. Behind the tent, barbecue pits smoked with ribs and brisket, tended by local farmers who'd received grants from our foundation. Guests arrived in a steady stream throughout the morning. Families from town, teachers with students in matching Wind Legacy t-shirts, farmers in their Sunday best, and suited executives from various energy companies. I spotted several faces from the coalition meetings, including a couple I suspected might be from Northstar. Lily found me adjusting my tie in the office of the new center. "You clean up nice," she said with a smile, straightening my collar, "though I still think you should wear the hat." The hat was a ridiculous cowboy hat she bought me as a joke after the cowboy on Wall Street comment I'd made about the coalition meetings. I laughed and put it on, tipping it at her with exaggerated formality. "Lily says I'm a cowboy, but I'm really just hiding my receding hairline," I joked, running a hand through my thinning hair. At 25, I was already following in Grandpa Harold's follically challenged footsteps. The ceremony began at noon, with Walter Clark serving as master of ceremonies. Various speakers took the stage: the mayor of Grand Island, a representative from Skyvolt, the superintendent of schools, all praising the Wind Legacy Center and its commitment to education and sustainable energy. Finally, it was my turn to speak. Standing at the podium, looking out at the crowd, I suddenly felt the weight of the journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I'd been a broke college dropout with no direction. Now I was addressing the crowd as the founder of a successful nonprofit. As I began my speech, I could almost feel Grandpa Harold standing beside me, his weathered hand on my shoulder. The words flowed easily, telling the story of his decades-long dedication to understanding the hill and its unique properties. When I inherited this farm, I saw 200 acres of weeds and a hill Nothing special, I admitted to the crowd. I nearly sold it all, walked away from what my grandfather had spent his life studying. I glanced toward the hill with its spinning turbines, but something made me pause. Something made me look closer at what he'd left behind. And what I discovered changed everything, not just for me, but for this community and potentially for how we think about renewable energy. The audience was silent, fully engaged. I saw Lily in the front row, nodding encouragement. Troy stood at the back, arms crossed but listening intently. Even Rita had come, sitting beside a family I didn't recognize but who seemed captivated by the story. The truth is, I continued, I didn't believe in a land. I believed in my grandfather, who loved it. I believed in his conviction that this place was special, that it had something important to teach us. A band started playing as the formal ceremony concluded, the familiar chords of Johnny Cash's Ring of Fire filling the air. People filed out of the tent toward the barbecue area, where long tables had been set up on the lawn. The smell of smoked meat and fresh-baked cornbread mingled with the ever-present Nebraska wind. I made my round to the crowd, shaking hands and accepting congratulations. A woman from the public broadcasting service interviewed me about the center's mission, her cameraman capturing footage of children exploring the interactive exhibits inside the newly finished building. Through it all, I kept an eye out for anyone who might be from Northstar, anyone showing undue interest in the hill rather than the center. But the celebration went smoothly, everyone enjoying the food, music, and perfect weather. As evening approached and the crowd began to thin, I found myself drawn to the hill. The turbines cast long shadows in the setting sun, their steady rhythm a comforting reminder of Grandpa Harold's legacy. Lily joined me, the cowboy hat now on her head, tilted at a jaunty angle. So, Mr. Wind King, how does it feel to pull this off? I smiled, watching the blades turning against the orange sky. I'm not the Wind King. I'm just a guy who listened to his grandpa. Well, you listen pretty good, she said, slipping her hand into mine. This place is going to help a lot of people understand what your grandfather saw here. We stood in comfortable silence, the turbines humming like old friends above us. The noise from the remaining partygoers seemed distant, as if the hill existed in its own pocket of peace. What do you think Harold would say if he could see all this? Lily asked. I considered the question, remembering all the times Grandpa had stood on this spot, meticulously recording measurements that nobody else thought mattered. How many sunsets had he watched from here, convinced that someday someone would understand what he discovered? I think he'd say, told you so. I chuckled as we turned to head back to the center. My hand brushed against something in my jacket pocket, a folded piece of paper I didn't remember putting there. Pulling it out, I recognized Grandpa Harold's handwriting immediately, though the paper was yellowed with age. Where did this come from? I wondered aloud, unfolding it carefully. Lily leaned closer to see. What is it? The note was brief, written in Grandpa's precise script. The wind is a beginning, not an end. Pattern discovery phase 1 complete. When you're ready for phase 2, check behind the north barn wall. My heart raced as I read the words. I'd been through every inch of Grandpa's notebooks, every file in his cabinets. How had this note appeared in my pocket? And what was behind the north barn wall? Do you think someone put this in your pocket during the ceremony? Lily asked, her voice hushed. I scanned the remaining guests, but saw no one paying particular attention to us. Just families enjoying the barbecue, colleagues in the foundation chatting in small groups, and Troy helping the band pack up their equipment. I don't know, I admitted, but Grandpa was always one for puzzles and hidden messages. Maybe he left this somewhere knowing I'd find it eventually. Whatever the source, the note felt like a sign, confirmation that while today marked the successful completion of one journey, another was just beginning. The Wind Legacy Center was established, the foundation was thriving, and the energy from the hill was benefiting the community just as Grandpa had always hoped. But his research had always hinted at something bigger, something beyond just consistent wind patterns. The fractals, the resonance, the mysterious connection to other sites. There was more to discover. I carefully refolded the note and placed it back in my pocket. The mystery of what lay behind the north barn wall could wait until tomorrow. Tonight was for celebrating how far we'd come. Life is like the wind, I said to Lily as we walked back toward the lights of the celebration. You can't control it, but you can learn to catch the flow. She smiled, returning my cowboy hat to me with a playful tip. Did your grandpa say that too? No, I laughed. That one's all mine, but I think he'd approve. The turbines continue their steady rotation behind us, harvesting energy from Grandpa Harold's mysterious wind. Above them, stars began appearing in the darkening sky, countless points of light in an endless pattern, just like the pattern Grandpa had spent his life trying to understand, a pattern that was somehow connected to the hill, to the wind, and to whatever waited behind the north barn wall. For the first time since dropping out of college, since losing my direction and nearly selling my inheritance, I felt completely at peace. Not because all the mysteries were solved or all the questions answered. They weren't. But because I'd found my purpose in continuing Grandpa's work, in building something that honored his vision while creating my own. The wind doesn't just blow. It tells a story. And Grandpa Harold's story, our story, was still being written one steady gust at a time.